there was no decision of like, this is the end of my season. I had full intention of returning.
They had one job, just one: keep the golden goose alive, keep her happy. Let her lay those multi-million-dollar eggs that would fund their pensions, their private jets, and their legacy deals. Instead, they loaded the shotgun themselves. What you're about to hear isn't just a sports story. It's a masterclass in self-destruction. A case study in how jealousy can blind people so completely that they'll burn down their own house just to watch someone else's garden die. Here's the scene. The WNBA, after 28 years of bleeding money, finally struck gold. We're talking sold-out arenas, merchandise flying off shelves faster than manufacturers could stock them, television ratings that made network executives weep with joy. And standing at the center of this explosion, one rookie, one woman, Caitlin Clark. But instead of protecting this phenomenon, instead of building a fortress around her, a faction within the league decided to attack, to bully, to demean, to physically punish the very player filling their bank accounts. And now, Sophie Cunningham has stepped into the ring. She's not here to play diplomat. She's not here to smooth things over with polite press conferences and carefully crafted statements. No, Sophie Cunningham is here to expose the rot, to call out the hypocrisy, and to defend the teammate who's being hunted by the very people she's trying to save. This is a story about money, ego, and betrayal. It's a story about what happens when legacy meets disruption, when old guard meets revolution, when bitter veterans realize that time isn't just running out, it's already gone. The WNBA Players Association just opted out of their collective bargaining agreement. They're betting everything on a massive pay raise. They're pointing to the revenue numbers and saying, "We deserve more." And they're absolutely right. But here's the twist that makes this whole situation insane. The very players demanding bigger paychecks are systematically destroying the leverage they need to get them. They're attacking their own bargaining chip. It's like demanding a raise from your boss while simultaneously setting the company building on fire. The owners aren't stupid. The investors aren't blind. They're watching. They're taking notes. And what they're seeing is a league at war with itself. You want to know what really happened between Sophie Cunningham and the players who've been targeting Caitlin Clark? You want to understand why this feud could cost every single WNBA player millions of dollars they'll never see? Then buckle up. Because the numbers I'm about to show you don't lie. The footage I'm about to break down doesn't lie. And the quotes coming directly from the players' mouths? They tell a story so damaging that the league might never recover. This isn't drama for drama's sake. This is the autopsy of a negotiation that died before it even began. Let's talk about what jealousy looks like when it wears a jersey. Before Caitlin Clark stepped onto a WNBA court, the league was surviving on life support. Not thriving. Surviving. There's a difference. The average WNBA game drew fewer viewers than a mid-tier cable cooking show. Teams were playing in arenas that echoed with empty seats. Merchandise? You could walk into any sporting goods store and find WNBA gear collecting dust on clearance racks. Then March Madness happened, and everything changed. Caitlin Clark didn't just break records at Iowa. She shattered the glass ceiling of women's basketball viewership. Her NCAA championship game drew over 18 million viewers. That's more than the NBA Finals games. More than some Super Bowl halftimes. She became the most watched women's basketball player in history. Not just in America. In history. The ripple effect was immediate. Suddenly, WNBA draft coverage exploded. Suddenly, season tickets became impossible to find. Suddenly, advertisers who had ignored women's basketball for decades were calling, begging, throwing money at anything Clark related. ESPN saw a 170% viewership increase. The Indiana Fever, Clark's new team, became the hottest ticket in the league. Road games started selling out because opposing fans wanted to see her play. This wasn't just a bump in popularity. This was a financial resurrection. And that's when the attacks began. It started subtly. A comment here. A dismissive interview there. Veteran players who had toiled in obscurity for years suddenly had microphones in their faces, and instead of celebrating the new attention, they weaponized it. She's overhyped. Her records are inflated. Wait until she faces real competition. You could hear the bitterness dripping from every syllable. But here's what makes this particularly ugly. These same players had been begging, literally begging, for mainstream attention for years. They complained that nobody watched. They complained about low salaries. They complained about flying commercial while NBA players flew private. Then Caitlin Clark delivered everything they ever wanted on a silver platter. And they responded with hostility. Sophie Cunningham watched this unfold. At first, like many, she stayed quiet. The unwritten rule in sports is that you don't get involved in other people's drama. You keep your head down. You play your game. But there's a line. And certain players didn't just cross it. They obliterated it. The physicality started escalating. What looked like hard fouls became something else entirely. Off-the-ball contact. Cheap shots when referees weren't looking. Hip checks that had nothing to do with basketball strategy. And the targets weren't random. Every single time, the crosshairs were on one player. Sophie Cunningham saw what was happening. She saw a young superstar being hunted. She saw teammates in other organizations looking the other way. She saw a league eating its own young. And she made a decision. A decision that would put her directly in the line of fire. What Sophie did next shocked everyone in the locker room. And the backlash she received? It exposed just how deep this problem really goes. Sophie Cunningham didn't send a press release. She didn't hire a PR team to craft the perfect statement. She didn't wait for the league to issue some watered-down memo about sportsmanship. She used her voice, directly, unfiltered, and absolutely devastating. In interviews and on social media, Cunningham began doing something almost nobody else in the WNBA was willing to do. She called it out, publicly, by name, without apology. She pointed to specific incidents. She highlighted the hypocrisy. She asked the questions that sports journalists were too afraid to ask. If we want the league to grow, why are we attacking the person who's growing it? If we want better contracts, why are we scaring away the fans who make those contracts possible? If we want respect, why are we acting like this? The response from certain corners of the league? Immediate, vicious, and completely predictable. Sophie was labeled a traitor. She was accused of picking sides instead of supporting the sisterhood. She was told she was pandering to fans who don't really care about women's basketball. Some players subtweeted her. Others were more direct, calling her out in group chats that inevitably leaked. The message was clear: fall in line or become a target yourself. But here's what Sophie understood that her critics didn't. This wasn't about Caitlin Clark as a person. This wasn't about protecting one player's feelings. This was about basic economics, basic strategy, basic survival. Let me break this down in terms even a first-year business student could understand. The WNBA Players Association wants a bigger slice of the revenue pie. That's fair. That's reasonable. That's how collective bargaining works. You prove your value, you demand compensation. But here's the catch. To get that bigger slice, you need leverage. And leverage comes from demonstrating that the product is worth investing in. That viewership will continue growing. That sponsors will keep writing checks. That the league is a stable, professional organization worth billions in long-term rights deals. Now, put yourself in the shoes of an owner, or a network executive, or a corporate sponsor. You're watching the WNBA's biggest star get targeted with cheap shots. You're watching veterans publicly trash-talk the rookie who's supposed to be the league's future. You're watching internal chaos being broadcast to millions of new fans. What do you conclude? You conclude that this investment is risky. You conclude that the league doesn't have its house in order. You conclude that maybe, just maybe, the viewership spike is temporary, and once the drama becomes too toxic, those new fans will disappear. And when you sit down at the negotiating table, you lowball. Art. Because why would you commit hundreds of millions of dollars to a product that seems determined to destroy itself? Sophie Cunningham understood this equation. She understood that every cheap shot, every bitter interview, every passive-aggressive social media post was costing the players real money. Not theoretical money. Real, tangible dollars that would never appear in their paychecks. But exposing this truth made Sophie a villain to a very specific group of players. The ones who had convinced themselves that jealousy was justified. That seniority entitled them to respect they hadn't earned. That Caitlin Clark's success was somehow a personal insult. And those players? They weren't about to back down. What happened next at practice shocked even the coaches. And the footage that leaked proved Sophie was right all along. The footage was never supposed to go public. Practice sessions are sacred in professional sports. What happens in the gym stays in the gym. It's an unwritten code that every athlete understands from their first day in the league. Someone broke that code. And what the world saw confirmed every suspicion that Sophie Cunningham had been voicing for months. The clip was grainy, clearly shot from a phone positioned at the edge of the court. But the audio? Crystal clear. And the actions? Undeniable. During a scrimmage, a simple practice session meant to build chemistry and sharpen skills, certain players weren't playing basketball. They were sending messages. Hard screens that came late. Elbows that flew high. Contact that continued well after the whistle. And every single time the recipient was the same. Caitlin Clark. But here's what made the footage truly damaging. It wasn't just the physical play. It was the body language, the smirks after contact, The dismissive waves when Clark looked to the coaches. The laughter shared between players who seemed to be treating this like a game within a game. The internet exploded. Casual fans who had tuned in because of Clark's college dominance were appalled. "This is how professionals act?" became a trending question. Sports commentators who had previously stayed neutral suddenly had opinions. Strong ones. And the sponsors? They started making phone calls. Not to congratulate the league on its growing visibility. No, they called to express concern. To ask questions about player safety. To wonder aloud whether associating their brand with the WNBA was still a smart investment. One insider, speaking anonymously to a major sports outlet, put it bluntly, "Every time one of these incidents goes viral, we lose leverage at the negotiating table. The owners see it. The networks see it. Everyone sees it except the players doing it." Sophie Cunningham didn't stay silent. Within hours of the footage leaking, she was in front of cameras. Not to apologize. Not to smooth things over. But to double down. "I've said it before and I'll say it again. You don't build a league by tearing down your best players. You don't demand respect while acting disrespectfully. And you definitely don't negotiate a better CBA by proving to owners that you can't police your own." The backlash was swift. Certain veteran players accused Sophie of airing dirty laundry, of being a sellout, of caring more about one player than the collective good. But the math told a different story. Since the attacks on Clark began making headlines, merchandise sales had started to plateau. Viewership, while still historically high, showed signs of softening. And most importantly, the narrative around the WNBA had shifted. It was no longer a story about a rising league finally getting its due. It was a story about jealousy, infighting, and self-destruction. The Players Association noticed. And behind closed doors, a civil war was brewing. One faction wanted to listen to Sophie, to protect the golden goose, to present a united, professional front. The other faction? They wanted Sophie gone. And they had a plan to make it happen. What they tried to do to her reputation next was beyond anything anyone expected. And it backfired spectacularly. They tried to cancel Sophie Cunningham. Not through basketball. Not through fair competition. Not through anything you could respect. They went after her character. It started with whispers. Anonymous sources feeding stories to journalists. Claims that Sophie was difficult to work with. That she had her own agenda. That she was only defending Caitlin Clark for personal gain, brand deals, attention, clout. The accusations were vague enough to spread but specific enough to sting. She's not a team player. She's doing this for followers. She doesn't care about the real issues facing women in this league. Within days, hit pieces started appearing. Opinion columns questioning Sophie's motives. Social media threads dissecting every public statement she'd ever made, searching for contradictions. Former teammates were contacted, asked leading questions designed to produce damaging quotes. It was a coordinated effort. And for a moment it looked like it might work. Sophie's mentions became a war zone. Trolls flooded her posts with accusations. People who had never watched a WNBA game in their lives suddenly had strong opinions about her character. The noise was overwhelming. But then something unexpected happened. The fans pushed back. Not just Caitlin Clark fans. Not just Indiana Fever supporters. Fans from across the league, people who had been watching the WNBA for years, started speaking up. They posted receipts. Screenshots of Sophie defending her teammates long before Clark was drafted. Clips of her mentoring younger players. Interviews where she advocated for better conditions for everyone in the league, not just stars. The narrative that Sophie was some opportunist fell apart under scrutiny. Because it wasn't true. Sophie Cunningham had been a tireless advocate for women's basketball her entire career. She had worked camps for kids, donated to grassroots programs, and consistently used her platform to elevate the sport. The idea that she was suddenly motivated by selfishness was laughable. And the players who had orchestrated the smear campaign? They overplayed their hand. When journalists started asking questions about the coordinated nature of the attacks, the story shifted. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't about Sophie's supposed flaws. It was about the toxic faction trying to silence anyone who spoke truth. One prominent sports journalist put it perfectly: they tried to destroy her credibility and instead they destroyed their own. The backlash hit like a tidal wave. Sponsors who had been quietly concerned now became vocal. Several publicly praised Sophie for her professionalism and leadership. One major athletic brand reached out with partnership inquiries. Not despite the controversy, because of it. Sophie had become the face of accountability in the WNBA. And Caitlin Clark? She finally broke her silence. For weeks, Clark had stayed quiet, taken the hits, absorbed the criticism without responding. Her media training was impeccable. Never give your enemies ammunition, never show weakness. But what Sophie did changed something. In a post-game interview that would be replayed millions of times, Clark was asked about the support she'd received from teammates like Cunningham. She paused, longer than usual, and then she said 7 words that sent shockwaves through the league. What came out of her mouth next made headlines around the world, and it forced the Players Association into an emergency meeting. "I know exactly who has my back." 7 words. That's all it took. Caitlin Clark didn't name names. She didn't point fingers. She didn't need to. Everyone watching understood exactly what she meant. And more importantly, everyone understood what she didn't say. She didn't say the league had her back. She didn't say the Players Association had her back. She didn't say the veterans had her back. The implication was devastating. Within hours, sports analysts were dissecting every syllable. Social media became a forensic investigation. Who had publicly supported Clark? Who had stayed silent? Who had actively participated in the hostility? Lists were made. Receipts were pulled. And suddenly, players who thought they were operating in the shadows found themselves in the spotlight. The Players Association was in crisis mode. An emergency meeting was called. Not a regular quarterly check-in. Not a scheduled negotiation prep session. An actual emergency meeting, convened within 48 hours of Clark's statement. Sources inside the room described the atmosphere as toxic. On one side, players who understood the gravity of the situation, who recognized that Clark's 7 words had just handed the owners a nuclear weapon in upcoming negotiations, who were furious that a small faction's jealousy was about to cost everyone millions. On the other side, the bitter contingent, the ones who had started this war. They were defensive, defiant, still convinced that they were the victims, that Clark was overhyped, that the media was blowing everything out of proportion. The meeting lasted 6 hours. Voices were raised. Accusations flew. At one point, 2 players had to be physically separated. And when it was over, nothing was resolved. The union released a generic statement about unity and moving forward together. The kind of corporate word salad that means absolutely nothing. The kind of statement that gets written when people can't agree on anything else. But the damage was already done. Owners had been watching. Network executives had been monitoring social media. Sponsors had been tracking sentiment. And the message they received was clear. This league is fractured. The negotiating leverage the Players Association had worked so hard to build, evaporating by the hour. One anonymous owner, speaking to a business publication, didn't mince words. "Why would we commit to massive salary increases when we can't even be sure the product will be stable next season? What if Clark decides she's had enough? What if the drama drives away the new fans? We'd be paying premium prices for a damaged brand." That quote spread like wildfire. And it confirmed what Sophie Cunningham had been warning about all along. Every attack on Clark wasn't just hurting one player. It was hurting every player. Every cheap shot was coming out of someone's future paycheck. But just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, another bombshell dropped. A recording surfaced. Private conversations between players. And what was said on that recording revealed the true depth of the conspiracy against Caitlin Clark. What you're about to hear should have stayed buried forever. But someone decided the world needed to know the truth. The recording was 47 minutes long. Nobody knows exactly who leaked it. Some suspect a player who had a crisis of conscience. Others believe it was a staff member disgusted by what they'd witnessed. A few conspiracy theorists claim it was orchestrated by league officials trying to clean house. The source doesn't matter. What matters is what was said. The audio quality was rough. Background noise, muffled voices, clearly recorded on a phone hidden somewhere in a locker room. But the words? The words were unmistakable. Multiple players. Veteran voices. Recognizable to anyone who had followed the league for more than a season. And they weren't discussing strategy. They weren't talking about upcoming games. They weren't breaking down film. They were coordinating attacks. Every time she touches the ball, make her feel it. Don't let her get comfortable. Ever. If she wants to be the face of this league, she needs to earn it the way we did. Refs won't call everything. Use that. Listening to the recording felt like eavesdropping on a criminal conspiracy. Because in many ways that's exactly what it was. A coordinated effort to physically and psychologically break a player. Not through competition. Through intimidation. But it got worse. At one point, the conversation shifted to media strategy. How to control the narrative. How to make Clark look like the villain. She complains about fouls, we say she can't handle the physicality. She stays quiet, we say she thinks she's above us. Either way, we win the story. The cynicism was breathtaking. These weren't hot-headed comments made in the heat of competition. This was calculated, premeditated, a systematic plan to sabotage a teammate, because that's what Clark was. A colleague, a fellow member of the union fighting for better conditions. And they wanted to destroy her. When the recording went public, the reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Fans were disgusted. Casual observers who had given the WNBA a chance because of Clark now openly wondered whether they should continue watching. Former players, legends who had built the league from nothing, expressed shame and disappointment. Corporate sponsors didn't just express concern this time. They acted. 2 mid-tier sponsors announced they were re-evaluating their partnerships. One major brand, which had been in negotiations for a multi-year deal, put discussions on hold indefinitely. The financial bleeding had begun. And the Players Association? Panicked. The same players who had attacked Sophie Cunningham for speaking out were now desperately trying to distance themselves from the recording. Taken out of context, they claimed. Locker room talk, they excused. Not representative of the whole league, they pleaded. But the damage was irreversible. Sophie Cunningham released a single statement. 3 sentences that became the most shared quote in WNBA history. The truth always comes out. We had a chance to build something special. Some people chose jealousy instead. The league was on fire, and the owners were about to pour gasoline on it. What the WNBA commissioner announced next sent players into a complete meltdown, and it threatened to tear the union apart forever. The commissioner called a press conference. No advance warning. No leaked agenda. Just a terse announcement that WNBA leadership would be addressing recent developments at 3 p.m. Eastern. Every player in the league stopped what they were doing. Media members scrambled to the venue. Social media held its collective breath. Even NBA analysts who typically ignored women's basketball tuned in. The stakes were too high to look away. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert walked to the podium looking exhausted. The kind of tired that comes from sleepless nights and impossible decisions. She cleared her throat, shuffled her notes, and then dropped a bomb. Effective immediately, the league is implementing a comprehensive investigation into player conduct. All allegations of coordinated targeting, intentional fouling, and conduct detrimental to the league will be thoroughly examined. The room erupted, but she wasn't finished. Additionally, in light of recent events, the league ownership group has unanimously agreed to pause all CBA negotiations until this investigation concludes and the Players Association demonstrates a unified, professional commitment to the league's growth. Pause. Negotiations. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Players watching from their homes felt their stomachs drop. Everything they had been fighting for, better salaries, improved travel conditions, enhanced benefits, was suddenly frozen. Indefinitely. And it was entirely self-inflicted. The Players Association released a furious statement within the hour. They called the decision retaliatory. They accused ownership of using isolated incidents to undermine collective bargaining rights. They threatened legal action. But the public wasn't buying it. Because the public had heard the recording. The public had seen the footage. The public had watched in real time as a faction of players systematically attacked the person responsible for their leverage. Comment sections were brutal. You played yourselves. Can't demand millions while destroying your own product. This is what jealousy costs. Inside locker rooms across the league, a reckoning was happening. Players who had stayed silent were now furious at those who had started this war. Players who had participated in the targeting were suddenly defensive, isolated, realizing that their actions had consequences beyond their wildest fears. And Sophie Cunningham? She was vindicated. Every warning she had issued, every criticism she had endured, every accusation of disloyalty she had weathered, all of it was proven right. She had seen this coming when nobody else would listen. Teammates started reaching out privately, apologizing for not speaking up sooner, asking how they could help fix this mess. The player who had been labeled a traitor was now being treated like a prophet. But vindication meant nothing if the league collapsed. Sophie understood that. And instead of gloating, she did something remarkable. She called a players-only meeting, not affiliated with the union, not sanctioned by leadership. A grassroots gathering of athletes who wanted to salvage what was left. The meeting was held in secret. No media, no management. Just players talking honestly about how they'd gotten here and what came next. What emerged from that room would change the trajectory of the entire league. And it started with a confession from the last person anyone expected. She stood up slowly, one of the veterans, a player whose voice had been clearly identifiable on that leaked recording, someone who had been at the center of the anti-Clark faction since day one. The room went silent. Every eye locked onto her, some filled with anger, others with curiosity, a few with something resembling hope. Whatever she was about to say would define whether this meeting meant anything at all. She took a breath. I was wrong. 3 words. But in that room at that moment, they carried the weight of an entire season's worth of destruction. I was jealous. I'm not gonna pretend otherwise. I watched this rookie come in and get everything I never had. The attention, the endorsements, the fans. And instead of celebrating what that meant for all of us, I made it about me. Tears started forming in her eyes. I've been in this league for 9 years. 9 years of empty arenas. 9 years of flying commercial while NBA benchwarmers flew private. 9 years of people telling me that what I do doesn't matter. And then she shows up and suddenly everyone cares. Her voice cracked. I should have been grateful. I should have seen her as the answer to everything we'd been fighting for. But I couldn't get past my own ego. And I'm not the only one. She looked around the room. Some of you were with me. You know who you are. And we need to own what we did. Because right now we're about to lose everything. Not just the CBA. Everything. The sponsors. The viewers. The credibility. All of it. Sophie Cunningham watched from across the room. She hadn't expected this. Nobody had. The woman speaking had been one of her harshest critics. Had called her a sellout. Had questioned her loyalty. And now she was confessing. I owe Caitlin an apology. I owe Sophie an apology. I owe every player in this room an apology. Because my jealousy didn't just hurt them. It hurt all of us. She sat down. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then one by one, others stood. Not everyone, but enough. Players who had participated in the whisper campaigns. Players who had thrown unnecessary elbows. Players who had liked the wrong tweets and shared the wrong takes. They confessed. They apologized. They committed to change. It wasn't perfect. Some players refused to participate. Some walked out, still convinced they were the victims. The fracture in the league wouldn't heal overnight. But something shifted. By the time the meeting ended, a new coalition had formed. Players who understood that the only path forward was unity. Players who recognized that Caitlin Clark wasn't a threat. She was the opportunity of a lifetime. Sophie Cunningham was asked to lead the group's public response. She didn't hesitate. The next morning, she stood in front of cameras again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood 24 players. Veterans and rookies. Stars and role players. A visual representation of a league trying to heal itself. And what Sophie announced shocked the sports world. The players had a proposal. A dramatic gesture that would prove to owners, sponsors, and fans that they were serious about change. What they offered to do would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. And it put the ball directly in the owner's court. Sophie stepped to the microphone. Behind her, the coalition of players stood united. Different teams, different backgrounds, different histories with the controversy. But in this moment, one voice. The sports world leaned in. We've spent weeks tearing each other apart, Sophie began. And while we were fighting, we forgot who the real opponent is. Not each other. Not Caitlin. Not the rookies or the veterans. The opponent is irrelevance. The opponent is going backwards. The opponent is letting this opportunity slip through our fingers. She paused. Let the words land. So today we're making a commitment. Not just words. Action. She unfolded a document. The players standing behind me represent over half the league. And we are jointly requesting that the CBA investigation be expedited. We are voluntarily submitting to conduct reviews. And we are proposing a new player-led accountability committee that will address internal conflicts before they become public disasters. Reporters started murmuring. But that's not all. Sophie looked directly into the camera. We are asking ownership to return to the negotiating table. Not because we deserve it, but because we've earned another chance. The players who caused this damage are taking responsibility. The players who stayed silent are speaking up. And the players who were targeted. She turned slightly. Caitlin Clark stepped forward. The room went electric. Clark had avoided cameras since her 7-word statement. Had let others fight the battle. Had focused on basketball while the world burned around her. But now she stood shoulder to shoulder with Sophie Cunningham. And she spoke. I didn't come to the WNBA to be a symbol. I came to play basketball, to win championships, to be part of something bigger than myself. And despite everything that's happened, I still believe in this league." Her voice was steady, confident, mature beyond her years. "I forgive the players who targeted me. I do. Because holding on to anger won't get us better contracts. It won't fill arenas. It won't grow the sport I love. What will? Unity, professionalism, being the league that little girls dream about joining." She looked at Sophie. "Players like Sophie showed me what leadership looks like. Not backing down when it's hard. Speaking truth even when it makes you unpopular. That's the WNBA I want to be part of." Sophie nodded. "So here's our message to ownership, to sponsors, to fans. We hear you. We understand what we almost destroyed, and we're committed to being better. Give us the chance to prove it." The press conference ended, but the impact was just beginning. Within 72 hours, ownership agreed to resume CBA negotiations. Sponsors who had paused discussions returned to the table with renewed interest. The two brands that had publicly distanced themselves quietly reopened conversations. And the ratings? The next WNBA game drew the largest television audience in league history. Fans who had tuned in for drama stayed for basketball. They watched Caitlin Clark play without fear. They watched Sophie Cunningham lead with integrity. They watched a league choose its future over its grudges. The new CBA wouldn't be finalized for months. Negotiations would be tough. Ownership wouldn't simply hand over everything players wanted. But the leverage was back. Because the league had proven something that money can't buy: maturity. The ability to self-correct. The willingness to protect its greatest assets instead of destroying them. 6 months later, the WNBA announced its largest media rights deal in history. Player salaries would increase by an average of 53%. Travel accommodations would be upgraded. Benefits would be expanded. And in the press release, one line stood out. "This agreement reflects a league unified in its commitment to growth, professionalism, and the elevation of women's basketball worldwide." Sophie Cunningham read that line and smiled. Caitlin Clark read it and got back to practice. The jealous faction that had almost burned everything down? Some retired. Some apologized and rebuilt their relationships. Some never admitted fault but quietly faded from relevance. History wouldn't remember them. History would remember the players who chose unity when division was easier, who protected the golden goose when others wanted to cook it, who understood that jealousy is expensive, but leadership pays dividends. The WNBA had survived its greatest internal crisis, and it emerged stronger than ever. Not because the problems disappeared, but because enough people decided that the future was worth fighting for. Sophie Cunningham and Caitlin Clark proved something that extends far beyond basketball. Something every organization, every team, every community needs to understand. You don't build legacies by tearing others down. You build them by lifting everyone up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That's the lesson. That's the story. That's the truth the WNBA learned the painful way. And now they're just getting started.